Hello, good evening. My name is Dan Hurlin, and I'm speaking to you from Florida. I'm very happy to be here. I've been asked to give a career talk, and so I'll be talking this evening about my career as a theater maker and a puppet artist. And I'll be showing images from different pieces as we go along, and a couple of video clips as well. After I'm done, there'll be time for questions. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the talk. But ask your questions to the chat. Thanks. Okay, so I guess I'm going to start. When I was growing up, it was clear that I was going to go into theater. I almost didn't have any choice. My mother was an actress. I actually started a children's theater when I was 10 years old that ran for 9 years. And I continued to work in theater all throughout my childhood. And by theater, I'm talking about the kind of theater that you know about, everything from Shakespeare to Chekhov to modern plays, the kinds of plays where people play characters and they enter rooms and there's furniture and they want things from each other, just kind of normal plays. But when I was in high school, there was a man who was teaching theater, whose name I honestly can't quite recall. But he had decided to do a play called Interview. An Interview was part of a trio of plays, which was called America Hurrah, written by Jean-Claude Van Italy in 1965. And this was only about 4 years later. This was in 1969 that I was in high school. And it blew my mind. It completely opened up a whole new thinking about what theater could be and about how to tell a story. And my career ever since then has really been focused on how to tell stories, but how to tell them in a way that is not usual, in a way that somehow brings something new to the story itself. And so my career really was launched at that moment into the world of experimental theater. And I was fortunate enough to go to a college where I could actually study experimental theater. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you images of pieces of mine from about 1990 onward. That was about the time that I left college and had struck out on my own in New York City to make theater. And you can start the slideshow now. Right. So I began to think about, I wanted to be a director when I graduated from college, but unfortunately, I found that I needed to pay actors and I didn't have any money. So I just thought, well, I'll just do it all. So I began to be a performer. And I wrote this adaptation of a novel by an American writer named Nathaniel West. It was the third novel he wrote, called A Cool Million. And I played all of the characters in it. It was a very physical piece. It was very demanding. And I played about 60 characters in that evening. And this is also where the seeds of I didn't act on it yet, but the seeds of puppetry came from this show, because there were these scenes where I had to be multiple characters talking to one another. And I realized that the best way to do it was to have an object stand in for that character. So the little bow tie that I'm wearing in that picture, I take that bow tie off and it's the hero of the story. And there's a former American president that's played by a tiny little American flag. And I realized that I could have the hero and the little American flag having a conversation, and I didn't have to actually embody those characters fully. I could just let the objects do it. The next piece I made was called Quintland. It's a story. I've become interested in doing stories that are true stories that have happened, that are historical. This is a story about a set of quintuplets that were born in Canada in the 1930s, and they became a tourist attraction. They were in 1934, 35, and 36. They were the largest industry in all of Canada, and it's a terrible story, and their lives were really difficult. But it was fascinating. And again, I used the same technique here. I played all the characters, and in this one there were a little bit fewer. There were about 50 characters. But again, I did that thing where I used the object to stand in for the person. And then the third big solo that I made was called Nothing So Powerful as Truth, which was based on the true story of a newspaper editor who was the owner of pretty much the only statewide newspaper in the state of New Hampshire, which is where I grew up. And I was inspired visually by Orson Welles' film Citizen Kane, and so I would borrow a lot of images from him and a lot of and some text even. Then in about, well, actually in 1995 or 94 or 95, I went to the Museum of American Folk Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I had been doing these solos where I had been using objects, and I'd even been working with a puppeteer, a puppet artist named Janie Geyser, whose work I loved. But I didn't think I was a puppet artist. I didn't think that was for me. But I went to the Museum of American Folk Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I took a look at this exhibit they had of antique toy theaters, and I had never seen them before. And I was just dumbfounded. I was so struck. I looked at these beautiful toy theaters and I thought, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And at the time, I was busy writing an opera, which you'll see next. But I went up to my studio, which at that time was in New Hampshire, and I sort of metaphorically locked the door and unplugged the phone, and I built a toy theater. No one had ever taught me how to build a toy theater or what a toy theater was. I just made the whole thing up by myself. And this was a story that was written by a dear friend of mine who had died, but he had written it when he was 8 years old, and it's all of 5 sentences long. The show runs 12 minutes long. Only 12 people can see it at a time because the proscenium arch is so small, but it has projections in it, and it has a sound score, and it's incredibly complex. And it's kind of a beautiful elegy to my friend who had died. And so that was my first real experience making puppetry of some kind. And this is the opera that I was writing at the time, that I made The Day the Ketchup Turned Blue. This is an opera that is based, again, on a true story. It's the story of a farmer in Iowa who was in his late 80s, and his brother had a stroke across the state. And this farmer couldn't drive to go visit him, and he didn't want to, ask somebody to drive him there, and he didn't want to take a bus or anything like that. So he went out and he bought a 1966 riding lawnmower and drove 200 miles across the state of Iowa just to visit his brother. And for me, this became a piece about aging. And I wrote it as an opera, and the man in the middle and the gentleman and the younger man on the right play the farmer simultaneously. He's the older man is a baritone, and the younger man is a tenor, and they sing the role of the farmer. And I am standing there behind them, and I basically play the state of Iowa. And I did pretty much the same kinds of things that I was doing before in my solos, where I would play multiple characters. But this time I was really casting myself as the background for this story about the farmer in Iowa. So at that point, I was so excited about the day the ketchup turned blue and about the possibility of object performance that I really just decided, okay, I'm just going to dive in here. And I made, this is really my first large scale puppet show. This is called The Heart of the Andes. It was based on the story of an American painter named Frederick Edwin Church, who had a gigantic painting that he unveiled in the mid 1800s called The Heart of the Andes. And in it, you can see, these giant mountains in the background, but in the foreground, he becomes so detailed you can actually see insects in the painting. And when it was unveiled for the first time, the viewers were asked to bring opera glasses so that they could look at, so they could like block out the gallery and just live in the painting. And there are stories of women fainting from the extreme experience. And I sort of likened that to a story in my own life about how when I was growing up, I was terrified of being bullied. And I would run home after school and I would just immerse myself in these big books of painters, and primarily of French Impressionists, but also contemporary painters. And at a very young age, it really it led me to think about becoming an artist of some kind. All of the objects in my pieces I make. So I don't ever, sometimes I have studio assistants who can come in and do things for me, but basically I make everything. I write the script, I write the story, I direct. If there are other people, I'm directing the puppeteers. And in this case, I was also performing everything. And this piece had a companion piece, which was different. It was called The Home of Bill and Sandy Kelly. And this story was also about looking. And it was about how it was sort of about a photographer, an American photographer named Richard Nickel, who had decided to photograph all of the buildings by an architect named Louis Sullivan, who were in the process of disappearing. They were all being torn down or they were all being refurbished. And he made it his mission to go and photograph all of the Louis Sullivan buildings. And while he was photographing one of them, it collapsed on him and killed him while it was being demolished. And I thought it's such a tragic story, but it's so interesting that he's killed by the thing he loves the most. And I was also mining my own childhood and thinking about how I grew up in a very big sort of Edwardian Victorian house that was full of antiques. And what I really wanted as a kid was I wanted a house just like that. I wanted a house that was like split level and modern and had big glass windows. And so it became a piece about looking and about the dangers of looking. This is me, sort of with me as a child here. And then Richard Nickel on top of the house looking out after me. And this is a piece after, this is the vision of after the building has collapsed on Richard Nickel. And there I am looking at it through binoculars. The two pieces, the Heart of the Andes and The Home of Bill and Sandy Kelly, were companion pieces, as I mentioned, and they were brought into the Jim Henson International Puppetry Festival in the year 2000, which was the last year of the Puppetry Festival. And I'll take a minute to mention now, that festival over here in America was enormously important. It only ran for something like 7 years, but it was really the first time that American audiences saw puppetry on a big scale that was intended for adult audiences. The puppetry here in America tends to be usually tied to the media. It's like on television. It's, it's Jim Henson and the Muppets. It's Sesame Street. It was in the 1950s. It was Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. It was Howdy Doody. So it was all for children. And the festival was really the first time that American audiences, myself included, had really experienced puppetry for adult audiences. It was incredibly enlightening and very exciting. And it was a large part of why I wanted to, dive into puppetry head first. And so now this is the first really major puppet piece that I made. And I'm not in it. This was really a puppet piece for 9 puppeteers. Again, it's based on a true story of 25 women who were brought to the United States in 1955 for reconstructive surgery after having survived the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. It's an amazing story. And I went to Japan really to study the bunraku. And I certainly didn't study for any, significant amount of time, but I was there for about a month. And I became, friends with some of the bunraku puppeteers. And I learned kind of what the bunraku system was. And I interviewed a lot of puppeteers about why and who and how and all of that. And I also had the opportunity to meet one of the original surviving Hiroshima maidens. And I got a chance to interview her about her experience coming to the United States in 1955. And they had to raise money for their surgeries once they were here. And they went on a program called This Is Your Life, which is a television program where there would be a guest of honor. And the guest of honor would be sort of surprised by being the guest of honor. And he or she would be brought up onto stage, and there would be voices of people from their past, and they would reunite them with people from various moments in their lives. And the producers of the show thought it would be a good idea to reunite the Hiroshima maidens and the man, Reverend Tanimoto, who was responsible for bringing them over. They thought it would be a good idea to reunite them with the pilot of the Enola Gay, which was the airplane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. All this on live television. And this is a government bureaucrat who is he doesn't want the maidens in the United States because they're trying at that time to find peaceful applications for nuclear power. And they didn't want these women who had been damaged by the bomb to be running around showing themselves. So they made a deal with them that they could only be seen in silhouette when they made public appearances. Sorry, I went too fast. And that's a slide of her flying to America. The next large piece that I made was called Disfarmer. And again, it's based on a true story. It's about an American photographer named Mike Disfarmer. His real name was Mike Meyer, but he changed his name legally to Disfarmer so that he could distance himself from his agricultural community. He was a little bit of a misanthrope, a kind of a loner. He lived alone in his studio. He was not a very pleasant man. And this piece imagines what the last week of his life might have been like. And to get at the idea of that he was dying, I thought of it as that he was going extinct because all of these little small town American towns would have a photography studio, but because of progress and because of the highway system and because of multiple factors, small towns were beginning to disappear, and these things in small towns, like photographers, were starting to go extinct. So to show that, in his last week, I made 6 identical puppets of this farmer, each one smaller than the other. And the puppeteers over the course of the show will swap him out so that it looks like he's shrinking. So in this piece, this farmer shrinks until he disappears into his own camera. And at this point, I'd like to play a little video from the show. This is him walking into town to buy the materials that he needs to run his photography studio. So that was him walking into town, and he would always go to the same things. He would always, stop and get a bottle of beer, a couple of bottles of beer, and he would go bother the man who was working at the auto mechanic, and he would go to the post office. He'd have his little route that he would go on. And this was my attempt at sort of trying to show what that route might have been like. There's one more thing I was going to say. Well, it'll come to me. Anyway, the next piece that I made then was demolishing everything with amazing speed. I was really lucky to have won the Rome Prize and to spend a year living in Rome at the American Academy in Rome. And I was interested in a group of artists named the Futurists, who were avant-garde artists from the turn of the last century. They were obsessed with speed and with violence, and they wanted non-representation. There were a lot of problematic things about the art movement, I think, but I was really interested in their art, and it was a very interdisciplinary movement. There were artists there who were making everything from paintings to sculptures to writing concertos to, all of them, whether they were a writer or a composer, would write a puppet show, or if they were a painter, they would write a poem. They were all doing, they were not discipline specific. The painters did everything, the writers did everything. And that really fascinated me. They did a series of plays called syntheses, and they're very short plays. They're only about, really literally that long on the page. And there's tons of them. There's a lot of them. And I really fell in love with them. They're very abstract and very peculiar. And so I went there, and my plan was that I was going to make about a dozen toy theaters, each one to house a different synthese. And then I would have them be performed simultaneously. And the audience would move around, and see them. So I began to work on it, and I began to look at a particular futurist artist named Fortunato Di Piero. And Di Piero wrote and produced a puppet show called I Balli Plastici, which means the plastic dances. And that was in 2000, I think that was in 1917 or 18. And he made really wonderful marionettes. You should look it up and look at his marionettes. They don't actually work. The strings, just by looking at them, if you know marionettes, you'll know what the problems with them are as puppets. But as art objects, they're gorgeous. But I also learned that he had written 4 puppet plays that in his notebooks that had never been produced, they had never been translated, and they had never been published. And so I went to the Di Piero archives and asked to see them. And there they were, these 4 remarkable little plays. And I decided to collect them all into one big performance called Demolishing Everything with Amazing Speed. So it's 4 puppet plays. This is an image from, I can't remember. Oh, this is an image from, this is an image from the first play called Acrobatic Homicides and Suicides. And then this is an image from the last play, which is called, I can't remember what it's called. I can't remember what it's called. It's about a love triangle, though. This woman is the wife of this man. He's a station master at a train station, and she leaves him and falls in love with an architect. And actually, that might be a good place to start this second video.
The woman is epileptic. The man has an obsession with bowing. He bows across the table. She quickly bows with her head so violently, it kills a child who is near. She devours everything on the table. And always gesticulating, she continues to order. Chicken, roast, steaks, fried foods, soup, salad, bottles, champagne, sweets, cakes, tea, coffee, spirits of any kind, and she demolishes everything with amazing speed. He gives her his arm, and they climb onto a train. Embrace. The car closes. Departure.
So that's the moment when the station master's wife meets the architect for the first time. And then I don't know what other pictures have. Oh, this is one of the plays was called Automatic Thief. And the way that we did this was with live feed camera projected on the back wall. And so all the puppets were really tiny. And we had to choreograph not only the puppets and the puppeteers, but this time we also had the third level of choreography, which was the camera. And then this is actually once again from the first piece, Acrobatic Homicides and Suicides, where there's a circus, and I decided to just make all of the different. This is sort of between things, but these geometric shapes would fall together to create a horse, or to create an umbrella, or to create various things that were happening in the circus. And then you can see in the screen behind them is the audience. And then the last piece that I'm going to show you is the latest piece that I did. During the COVID epidemic, a lot of the theaters in the United States closed. It wasn't safe to work in large groups. And a lot of people turned to the internet, and we're making puppet shows for the internet. And that was fine, and they made really beautiful things. But I continued to examine why I liked puppetry and why I liked what it was that I was doing, and how do I do that in a world that doesn't have theaters and where you can't sit in a room with other people, let alone be in a rehearsal room with other people. And what I realized was that the one thing that I really loved about puppetry was its three-dimensionality, and that was simply, you couldn't capture that on a TV screen. I'm still developing a piece called Bismarck, about another true story. And I had this idea. I thought, if I just build the set for the last scene in Bismarck, by the time I get Bismarck actually produced by a theater, I'll have the set already done. So I began to build a motel room, which is where the last scene in the play takes place. And then I installed it in a gallery. So this is what you would see when you first walk into the gallery. It doesn't look like anything. It just looks like a big, plywood crate. And then you step up onto this little viewing platform here, and you get a chance to look in from the top, and you see a motel room. And these are very inexpensive, cheap motels that are dotted all across America. As I was building the project, it became clear to me that I was not adhering to the story in Bismarck anymore. This was a piece that had taken on its own life and had become its own thing. So I made a different puppet for it than the one in Bismarck. And this room is full of, again, I made everything, and there's everything from like light switches on the walls to the doorknobs to the hinges to the drawer pulls, to the toothpaste tubes. There's on the bed, there's a Bible. There's always a Bible in a motel room in America. This is looking down at the little vanity in the bathrooms. So, it's got the ice bucket and the glass and the shampoos, soaps, toothpaste, and a toothbrush. This is a hair dryer. These are all things that come standard in a motel room. And then there's the woman who is sitting there, and she does not look happy. She looks like she's deep in thought and worried about something. And by her, on the table, there is a pile of money. I'm not sure you can see it right there. And so the piece actually becomes a big sort of narrative about the specifics of which I don't know. They're entirely up to the viewer to decide what the piece is about and what is this story. Why is she in a motel room? Why is there money? There's another area of the motel room here where you can see there's on the desk, there's a letter that she's written, and then there's crumpled paper. So she's had a hard time writing this letter. There is a fur coat and a slip that are hanging here. So all of these little clues add up to a narrative that is not specific. And I kind of fell in love with this form, and I'm feeling a little bit like this is the way that my work is going to go from now on, that I'm going to kind of make these static puppet shows where the audience will have to do a lot of the narrative work. And so I'm pretty sure that is the direction that my work is headed. Now, the theaters are back open, but it's very difficult now to get a show. It's extremely difficult to get funding now. And with this, I just had to go into my studio and, make the stuff myself. And we're back at the very beginning where I realized I wanted to make something and I would have to pay people, but I didn't have any money. And so I decided, well, I'm just going to make it like this. So the same problem I had solved two different ways. So that's what I have now. And now I guess I'm going to take some questions, and I'm going to go kind of in order. I have 3 questions so far. The first question is, in an age increasingly dominated by digital media and technologies, what do you see as the role and relevance of puppetry and live performance arts? I know what I'm supposed to say, but I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know the answer to it. I think puppetry is an analog art form, and it's an analog is important. Analog things are important for various reasons. They keep us in touch with the world, with the material of the world, with the people in the world, in a way that technology kind of distances us from the world. And by the way, I don't want to, I don't want to disparage technology. I think technology is fantastic, and I love working with it and demolishing everything. There was tons of technology about which I know nothing, but I had enough money to hire people who did know how to do it. So I don't disparage technology. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I just think it's like a tool that we have, and it's just a different tool. And now, it used to be that electric lights were a whole brand new, exciting tool, and the theater had to figure out how to use it. And I think technology is pretty much the same, and American theater and theater in general is trying to figure out how to use it. I think, but I do think that there's always got to be a place for live performance. There has to be a way that you can connect with your community, even if it's just sitting next to a stranger. Question 2. Your work has been recognized with several prestigious awards and nominations. How have these moments of recognition influenced your perspective on success and your approach to your work? I think I feel very lucky. And I think, and it's funny, I don't feel successful. I don't feel successful until I make a new piece. And then after I make the piece, I feel successful, and then I'm back to not feeling successful. I don't feel successful in my career. I feel like each individual piece was successful. But overall, I don't necessarily feel like I'm a successful artist. Lord knows I can't make a living at it. I have had to teach for the last 25 years. I'm retired now, but for the last 25 years, I was teaching at Sarah Lawrence College. I was the head of the theater program. And it was a wonderful thing, but it wasn't art making, but I needed, I needed to make money. And how has the recognition that I've gotten impacted the way I approach my work? I'm not sure, except that now I think I feel more and more at ease taking risks. I think being risky is the most important thing that an artist can be, and I feel like I have had to grow into that. And so all of this support that I've had on these awards and stuff and residencies have emboldened me to make me feel like I can take bigger risks, and that's very exciting. Question, wait, did I skip one? No. Question 4, maybe I did. How do you continue to find inspiration and motivation in your work, especially during the challenging times? Well, I find inspiration for my work from real life. I'm constantly scouring newspapers and radio programs and listening for these oddball true stories. And that, I think, is really where I get the biggest inspiration. I'm starting to now think about doing a series of paintings, and these paintings are all from, I'm really fascinated by the things that are around us that we never see. Things like electrical panels or plumbing pipes, things that are that have a certain kind of beauty, I guess, but they're just everywhere. And I find that really interesting. So I'm thinking about making a whole bunch of paintings, paintings of plumbing pipes and electrical panels and stuff. So I think that's sort of where I'm going. And it's sort of related to the next question here, which is, what's the role of collaboration in my work, and how do I approach collaboration with other artists and creatives? Okay, well, I think that collaboration is, I've always said, and I always told my students, I think collaboration is an incredible act of generosity. In order to collaborate, you need to listen, and you need to really appreciate the way other people's brains work. And even when I was teaching in classes, I would, give the students a prompt, and they would, they would come up with all of these solutions, and I'd go, "Oh my God, I never would have thought of that. How cool is that?" I think we have to in order to collaborate, you really have to be excited by the way other people think. And so in that way, I feel like collaboration is an expression of generosity. I love collaborating. Currently, the problem with collaboration is I want to be able to pay artists that I'm collaborating with. And the funding situation in this country ever since the pandemic has really changed, to the point where it's very hard for me to secure funding. And so, as what I said, what I'm doing is I'm adapting to kind of move on to the next new thing, which are these large gallery installations that I think of as kind of static puppet shows. And we'll see how long that lasts. We'll see if that's interesting, or if I lose interest, or if the world doesn't like them. We'll see how it goes. And then here's question 7. Could you share a pivotal moment in your life that deeply influenced your career path and brought you to where you are now? Well, I think how I came to making a piece like Motel, that was born out of a pivotal moment, and it was born out of a moment of difficulty, and really the same with A Cool Million. That was born out of the difficult moment of wanting to make a piece, but having to do it all myself. So I think all of these, what's the word I'm looking for? All of these impediments have actually always, in the end, ended up being very, all of these challenges that I've had to face have indeed kind of made me get better and better and better. So I feel like I missed one question here, but no. I think I got all of the questions. Pivotal moment in my life. 6th question I missed. Oh, thank you. Could you discuss a moment or a piece of work? Okay, thank you. Oh, pushed you back. Could you discuss a moment or a piece of work that significantly challenged your artistic beliefs and pushed your boundaries? Yeah, I can name a ton of them. Not my own. My own pieces, I've always had to kind of, I've been solving problems all along. So, and all of my pieces have sort of made me think differently about how do I solve this problem and how do I grow. But when I look at other people's work, and again, it's that thing of like looking at the way other people's brains work and just being just so gobsmacked and delighted by it. But there are definitely other pieces that have blown me out of the water, including the piece I mentioned at the very beginning of tonight's talk, interview by Jean-Claude Vanitali. That just changed my whole idea about what theater could be. Robert Wilson is a director whose work changed the way that theater is. I mean, I think he did that for everyone. There's an experimental theater group in New York called the Worcester Group, and their work is, again, totally challenging and completely new, and it continues to be new. I don't know how they do it. The artist Meredith Monk, her work all of these pieces make me do just what you said, challenge my artistic beliefs and push my boundaries, because they made me think of a new way of thinking about theater, because my brain didn't think that way. I would say that those are really the pieces that I think. Oh, there's actually Rezo Gabriadze, his piece. I forget what it was called, The Battle of Stalingrad. That piece, that piece blew me out of the water, and I looked at it and I thought, oh my God, I had no idea that puppetry could do that. I just was so completely impressed with that piece. Now there's an 8th question. Who have been some of my most influential mentors or inspirational figures in your life and career? Going back to the very beginning, I'd have to say my mother, because she was an actress and she was the one who sort of got me involved in theater making. There are photographs of me teaching all of the little kids in my town how to build a stage flat. I worked with for a while I also was a dancer for a while, and I love dance. I think I like dance almost more than theater, and I tend to think of puppetry as more like dance than theater, because all of the information that's conveyed from the stage is conveyed through movement, and it's the same in dance and it's the same in puppetry, because all that puppets do is they move. That's what they do. So everything has to be communicated through movement. And so there was a choreographer that I worked with named Remy Charlip, who was also a children's book illustrator, and he was sort of one of the first, what we call hyphenates, or a triple threat, a person who is really skilled at writing, at painting, at choreography. He's skilled at multiple things. And working with him in college was super influential and important to me, and opened the door for me to think about, to think that, like, if you have an idea, that idea could be a play, or it could be a movie, or it could be a painting, it could be a dance, or it could be a building. That idea can translate into so many different forms. And some ideas make better concertos than they make poems, or they make a better play than they do a painting. And so you have to look at what the essence of the idea is that you have, and find out what's the right form for it. And I think that's why I haven't made very many puppet shows, because I'm constantly asking myself, why is this a puppet show? Why don't I just get actors? Why go through the trouble of building all of this stuff and all these objects and these puppets, when I could just hire an actor to do it and it'd be a lot easier? So I'm constantly asking myself, why is this a puppet show? Why does this have to be told this way? And again, that goes back to what I said at the beginning about thinking about different ways of telling stories. And for puppetry, you think, well, why is this a puppet show? And I've sort of experimented with a bunch of different things having to do with that. And of course, there's the obvious answer that, oh, well, a puppet can fly and a human being can't, or, a puppet can die on stage and a human being can't. But you have to ask, like, what is it that the essence of puppetry can bring to this story and bring it forward? And what can it give to that story? And here's the last question. What advice would I give to aspiring artists? Whoops. Oh, whoop, I just lost the question. It disappeared. What advice would I give to aspiring artists who wish to explore puppetry and its potential in contemporary theater? In a word, don't be afraid to fall on your face. Try it. There's no rules. There's no rules. Like people make you think that, oh, there's a rule in theater that you have to have, that you have to have an objective and you have to have a set and you don't have to have, there's no rules. There's no rules. So you can do whatever you want. And so try it. And that's the only way that you'll be able to know if it works. You have to try it. It has to be physical. You have to actually do it. You can't think about it. Just by thinking about it isn't going to make it work. So you have to try it. Okay, and I guess that's it. That's it for the evening. So I'm wrapping up now, and I want to say thank you to the American Center in Moscow for hosting this evening. It's been a real pleasure. And maybe I look forward to doing it again one day. I guess I'm 2 minutes early, aren't I? So I'll tap dance for 2 minutes. Oh, here, wait. Oh, there's one more question. What do I think modern puppet theater can give more audiences in comparison with human theater or popular immersive theater? Can I answer that in 1 minute? Puppets are blank slates. The audience projects everything onto a puppet, and you can't do that with a human being. You can kind of do it with a human being, but a puppet, you can make the puppet think anything. And that's the beauty of puppetry, that the puppet is a blank slate. Okay, that's my last word. Now you can play the music.